In a fairly recent video, VenomFangX lists his top 10 atheist strawmen. I will post a link on the video description, please check it out if you haven't already. As this is the first proper video I'm making, the sheer volume of the material forces me to leave some subjects for later. I will make note of all of them and get back to them sooner or later. And if you notice any errors, please point them out and they will be corrected, either as a new version or as a separate errata video. So, atheist strawmen, eh? We'll see how that works out for you.
Princeton University defines a strawman argument as a weak or sham argument, set up to be easily refuted.
While that is technically true, it fails to uniquely identify a strawman argument. A strawman argument is a logical fallacy in which one constructs a misrepresentation or oversimplification of the opponent's position, which is then easily defeated. The fallacy lies in assuming that since the constructed strawman is false, the position that is actually held by the opponent is also false. It has often been said that it is easier to defeat a position that no one is defending. It is also worth noting that you can accidentally make a strawman. To avoid using it accidentally, always make sure you thoroughly understand your opponent's position. This is also one of the more common creationist fallacies, as they rarely, if ever, really understand what evolution actually states. It seems that VenomFangX really didn't do any further research into what a strawman really is, since most of the arguments presented are in fact not strawmen. Ironically, the very fact that he misrepresents what a strawman argument is in itself a form of strawman.
Atheists like to say, "There is no God." And to them I say, "There is a God." And now it's my word against theirs. So now it's our job to show each other evidence to support our claims. Whoever has the most compelling evidence likely has the stronger argument. Now, what evidence would you show me to prove the non-existence of anything? I mean, it's very difficult to show evidence of the non-existence of something. So the burden of proof is actually on the person who asserts that something does exist, and to claim something does not exist is simply to ignore all the evidence that something does exist. So you might say, well, what evidence is there that God does exist? Well, I happen to have plenty of evidence. I mean, quite frankly, I've got plenty of evidence. Atheists just seem to have selective hearing, or selective vision, it seems.
Claiming that God doesn't exist, while unprovable, is not a strawman argument. It is simply a claim. He does do a good job in explaining what a debate is. He even gets the burden of proof right, but then goes on to say that he has plenty of evidence to support his claim. Well, let's have it. Oh, all right. He's trying to imply that the existence of the universe is proof of God. In fact, he is claiming that because we do not yet know how the universe came to be, God must have done it. This is simply an argument from ignorance, and as such, fallacious.
You know, I'd ask any atheist, do you know everything? Well, let's be modest and say maybe you know half of everything. Is it possible that God exists in the half that you don't know? Because in order for you to claim that there is no God, that means you know that there is no God, which would make you all-knowing, and that would make you God anyway, so that's self-refuting. The fact is, you do not know everything. Therefore, the fact that you do not know God does not exclude the possibility of His existence, and certainly you must take into account the fact that there are many people who claim to know Him. I happen to be one of those people.
This one is nearly a valid point. We cannot prove that God doesn't exist. In fact, we can't prove anything outside mathematics. I'll dig into this one in a later video. Unfortunately, VenomFangX then goes on to use a fallacious ad populum argument. Just because most people used to believe that the Earth is flat doesn't mean it is.
The next one is, can an all-powerful God create a rock too heavy for him to lift? Now, I don't usually answer questions with questions, but can an invisible man be seen? Well, if he can be seen, then he's not invisible, and the question itself is self-refuting. You see, if God is all-powerful, that means there is nothing that is too heavy for him to lift. So your question is actually a contradiction of terms, and is not really a problem with God. What they're trying to do is this. They're trying to say, well, if God cannot create a rock too heavy for him to lift, then he is not all-powerful. Well, that's not true, because all-powerful means there is nothing physical that is too heavy for him. It's the same as saying, well, if an invisible man cannot be seen, then he's not invisible. That clearly does not make sense. So then what they're trying to show you is, well, then that just means there's something God cannot do. God cannot create a rock too heavy for him to lift. Well, who said that God can do everything? Certainly not I.
This one is actually quite close to being a proper straw man. The purpose behind the argument is to show that omnipotence implies paradox and is as such impossible by means of reductio ad absurdum. While I'm given to understand that Christians do claim their God to be omnipotent, using different definitions of the word omnipotent might cause the straw man to occur. I personally believe that the Xians are just moving the goalpost, another kind of fallacy, continually redefining what they mean by omnipotent whenever someone proves it to be impossible. I'll be digging deeper into logic and paradoxes in a future video.
God cannot lie, God cannot steal, God cannot do something that is illogical, God cannot create a circular triangle, God cannot send you to hell for no reason. You see, God is a God of logic and morality, and God cannot defy his nature or the laws of non-contradiction. So, God cannot do something that does not make sense, and you wouldn't want a God like that, because then God could do something to you that does not make sense, and that would suck. So the God that the atheist is appealing to here is a God of nonsense, which is exactly why they don't believe in God, because their concept of God is nonsense. The real and living God is true, and he is logical.
This is a really interesting bit right here. I'm pretty sure most of this would be categorized under heresy by most religious institutions. Whatever happened to God moves in mysterious ways? And I would agree that if there are gods or a god, they cannot be exempt from logic. But that could just be the mathematician in me talking. I concede that he got one bit absolutely right. Atheists don't believe in God because their concept of God is illogical. Exactly, Sparky. This is precisely why rationalists reject religion. The reason why I think that this position is the correct one is that I believe the atheist concept of God is in fact logically constructed based on scripture, and thus a correct concept. This is a statement that has to be justified, not simply asserted. I intend to make a video out of this as well, but there is already a queue, and I don't know when I'll be getting around to actually making that one.
The next one would be, who created God? The answer is no one. God always existed. It's as simple as this. Either everything came from nothing, or something always existed. Since nothing can only make nothing, therefore something always existed, and that, dear friends, is God.
This is not a strawman argument. This is a question. Of course, old Sparky's answer, on the other hand, seems to emit bogons. Firstly, the claim that everything came from nothing is simply a straw man of the Big Bang Theory. And secondly, the dichotomy something from nothing or God always existed is false. One could just as validly assume that the universe always existed. No problem there. To be continued in part 2.